set. Good evening. I'm Albert Carnesell, Dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and it's my privilege to welcome you to this afternoon/evening's forum event. Just a brief bit of history. I'm not going to recite everything about this award, but simply to say the George S. Dively Award was created in cooperation with the Center for Business and Government here at the school and the George S. Dively Foundation. And the purpose of this award, as it was originally established, is to recognize leadership in corporate public initiatives. Now, last year, the selection committee focused on mid-size companies with outstanding public initiatives. And our speaker tonight, representing the firm that won the award this year, will have more to say about that in a moment. I will introduce him last, but let me introduce our panelists at the same time, so I'm not jumping up here each time introducing the next speaker, but can simply say their name, and at that point you'll know who they are. We have two discussants and then some closing remarks to be made. The first discussant, Martin Kaplan. He's a senior partner at Hale & Dorr here in Boston, and he is the chairman of the Massachusetts Board of Education, appointed by Governor Weld earlier this year. He's leading the board's efforts to obtain approval of educational reform legislation here in the state of Massachusetts, leading the way in trying to do it at the state level in the nation. Our other discussant will be Peter Dorringer. He's a professor at economics at Boston University. Many of you have seen it as you drive down Storrow Drive. It's the one on the other side of the river. At least as importantly, he's a fellow in the Center for Business and Government here at the Kennedy School, a specialist in the business-government partnership, and particularly as it relates to training and employment. And the closing remarks will be presented by Richard Siren, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Now, a bit about our speaker and representing this year's winner. The speaker is the Henry Vogt Machine Company of Louisville, Kentucky, and the CEO and president of that firm is Henry Heiser. This firm was founded in 1980, and in 1958 created a Henry Vogt Foundation. And this foundation has dedicated its efforts to institutional leadership in local educational institutions. You'll hear more about some of the things they have done, but their emphasis has been on training, on intergenerational education, on literacy, on using the latest computers and making them available to workers, to their families, to the latest technology. This is not any second-level operation. This has been a first-level operation, and such that it was selected as the winner of the Dively Award this year, and representing the Henry Vogt Machine Company of Louisville is its leader, Henry Heiser.
Thank you, Dean Carnesell. It's really a great honor and thrill for me to be here at Harvard and be here with you all tonight. The attention given this award has been very exciting for all of us at our company, and many citizens and corporate friends throughout the Louisville and Jefferson County area have really been tremendously warm and embracing the goals of advancing educational opportunities, and have shown tremendous support since it was announced last week that we won the award. Of course, I knew about it in August, and I've been really excited about it ever since. It's really also a special treat to be here because I want to tell you of an important relationship that Boston shares with Louisville. I'm involved in an organization that is actively preserving the extensive park system, and Frederick Law Olmsted designed that park system. It's one of the largest he did in his entire career, exactly 100 years ago. So coming to Boston is like making a journey back to Mecca, because this is the cradle of landscape architecture in America. I'm also thrilled to be back again because I have been an ongoing participant at Harvard's Arnold Arboretum summer programs, and I hope you all realize, those of you from Boston, what a fabulous asset it is. And I've enjoyed my relationship with the Arnold for about 5 years now. Well, those of us at Henry Vogt accept with a great deal of excitement and honor this 1992 Dively Award. However, it's important from the outset to stress that I feel you are honoring a concept and not a company. That concept is simple yet very ambitious. In Louisville, we seek to make technical and computer literacy a continuous process that involves adults as fully as it involves young people. We propose to provide the present and future workforce with the technological tools they need to compete now and in the 21st century. Many people have contributed a great deal of time, talent, and ideas to make the Louisville experience worthy of your consideration. There is, of course, Dr. David Birch, son of Harvard, who came to Louisville 10 years ago and challenged us to advance our efforts in education. He was the inspiration and catalyst for much of what has happened in our city. And then there is Dr. Donald Ingerson, Louisville Superintendent of Schools and the National Superintendent of the Year for 1992. Those of you who were in the seminar this afternoon heard his remarks. Dr. Ingerson, would you stand so we could recognize you? 92,000 students a year are benefiting from his visionary leadership. Another is, and with us tonight, is Mr. Joseph Stouffer, a very successful attorney in Louisville and president of the Gaines Foundation, which sponsors the Gaines Academy in Louisville. Mr. Stouffer, would you please stand? Thank you. The Gaines Academy is a national leader in providing support, training, and technical assistance to our schools, which is just one of the many of their projects. Both the Gaines Foundation and our entire school system owe a debt of gratitude to Dr. Regina Kyle, who's a Boston-based consultant and an external evaluator for the Gaines Foundation. You heard from her earlier in the seminar, those of you there. Dr. Kyle, would you please stand? It's her task to track the effectiveness of the academy and the schools, and she was also the architect for changing our entire vocational educational focus and put us into the 21st century. She leads education reform nationwide. Well, Henry Vogt was my great-grandfather, and he founded a simple business 112 years ago, and the products that he produced at the turn of the century have evolved into our current offerings. Today, the world knows us as a manufacturer of quality forged steel valves, heat recovery steam generators for industrial and utility power plant applications, and commercial ice-making equipment. Perhaps later at dinner we'll see some of our famous tube ice in the water glasses. We are the market leader in each of these product lines. We're relatively small and have been privately owned since our founding in 1880. This, of course, goes counter to the bigness and public ownership that are common in industry today. Vogt's relative smallness and private ownership gives us an enviable advantage, I believe, in being closer and more responsive to our customers and our employees. Well, today, as Henry Vogt's Chief Executive Officer, I'm facing some sobering facts. One fact is a marked change in our customers and how they do business. We find that our customers are selecting fewer suppliers, are insisting on lower costs, and are demanding absolute perfection of product. Another fact is that the United States is only 25% of the total available market for our products. We are in a global economy, and it is intensely competitive. The fastest growing part of our business is international. Also, and I'm very fortunate for this, but we have a very veteran workforce, meaning the average employee is about my age, actually that young. He or she employee has manually operated a machine for many years and is being threatened by a generation of computer literate newcomers, especially as computer integrated manufacturing grows in importance. We owe those loyal employees a lot for sticking with us during good times and bad. We owe them the retraining and continuous education that will provide them job security and a promising future. They are our greatest asset. Unless we continuously retrain and educate these workers, we face a grim competitive future, as I've just outlined. This is much more than a vote or a Louisville challenge. It is true from coast to coast, and I'm sure those with me tonight share these same concerns. Well, as was expressed in the seminar this afternoon, computers are the common thread that weaves through all of our business activities, especially engineering, as well as philanthropy. The emphasis on computers and technical literacy for our foundation grants is a conscious choice we made in 1986. At that time, we were a more typical company when it came to corporate giving. We had given more than 1,000 grants to a wide variety of mostly brick and mortar projects. Our charitable foundation, which we fund every year with about 5% of pre-tax profits, was nearly 3 decades old at the time. Today, our giving philosophy closely mirrors our published corporate mission statement. That's because we view computer and technical literacy as a critical investment in our own future. This investment is part of Dr. Edward Deming's total quality management culture that we have enthusiastically adopted and have so since the beginning of the 80s. Dr. Deming's 14 points of management are, of course, well known to most business people today. And the central doctrine relates to empowering employees to do their very best. And this is in part accomplished through constant training and retraining. One principle of TQM holds that many quality problems and other difficulties can be traced directly to the lack of training. A recent article in Fortune magazine stated that 1/3 of all factories couldn't modernize their work procedures because its workers couldn't understand new quality control techniques, such as statistical process control, manufacturing resource planning, MRP2, and just-in-time. This national problem is also evident in Louisville. A few years ago, we noticed this disturbing trend in our local labor pool. When we sought an experienced computer literate draftsman, the successful applicant came from Brooklyn. And when we needed a programmer, the best qualified person hailed from Cincinnati. Cincinnati, we talked a lot about that this afternoon. Many of the key engineers we have hired recently were educated in Germany, India, Russia, and Switzerland. It didn't take a genius to figure out we had some training to do among our adult workforce. With that need, being located in Louisville gave us a real head start. So permit me to explain. You'll recall that a few moments ago I paid tribute to David Birch. He came to Louisville in 1982 to address business and civic leaders. And at the time, our public schools had only 2 computers, and one of those was used for record keeping. Dr. Birch activated and challenged us. During the question period following his speech, he was asked what Louisville should develop if it suddenly had several $1 million to spend. The choices included a new airport, a satellite transmission base, and computers in every school. Dr. Birch came down squarely on the side of computers in school. We took his opinion to heart. Local businesses, including Vote, joined together to provide funds for a program we called New Kid in School. The new kid, of course, was a computer. Basically, that program provided computer access for every single student. More than 250 local businesses joined us in this partnership effort, along with more than 150 school and parent groups. This was truly a focused community effort. There is now at least 1 computer lab in each of our 154 elementary, middle, and high schools. Remember now, in 1982, our public schools owned only 2 computers. Today, we have more than 9,000. Think of it, in a decade, we went from 2 to 9,000, and mostly with private money. We have one computer for every 10 students, compared with the national average of one for every 50 students. Children in kindergarten today will have received 13 years of computer-based instruction by the time they graduate from high school. An evaluation of the new kid in school was conducted from 1984 to 1990 and showed many impressive findings, such as, and perhaps most importantly, provided over 1,000 teachers, each with 60 hours of technical training. Those teachers in turn trained 3 to 5 other teachers in their departments or at their grade levels, so that now over 4,000 district teachers have had technology training. Well, you can see that VOTE had a base to build upon when we set out to develop a computer literate workforce. And last year, our company and many others, I have to stress that, tremendous cooperation in the community, worked with Superintendent Ingerson to begin another partnership program. It's called New Kid Moves Ahead and Beyond. This latest community-wide campaign plans to place 6,000 additional computers in all the schools. Each school will have its own set of laptop computers, interactive video systems, desktop publishing, and telecommunications. VOTE kicked off this campaign by announcing our sponsorship of complete labs with 600 computers and the above equipment in 14 schools. Not surprisingly, the 14 schools we selected were right in the demographic center of our employee population. That's just part of the story. The program goes further by addressing the needs of the adult workforce, and in several ways. It has been established that about 8 out of 10 of those who will be working in the year 2000 are already on the job. In other words, the vast majority of those we need to reach are already out of school and have been for several years. In meeting adult needs, we're responding to another challenge from Dr. Birch. In November of '88, he came back to Louisville to help us celebrate the success of the first phase of our program. Dr. Birch stressed that we shouldn't rest until we have as many adults in our schools as we do children. We are gearing up to meet that challenge. First of all, many young students take laptop computers. Many young students who use laptop computers take them home. That means their parents are exposed to the computers. In Louisville, parents and other adults can also enroll in night school. That's spelled NITE and stands for New Initiatives in Technology Education. Night School, which is funded by VOTE, gives adults a chance to work directly with the new technology and with children. There's a side benefit to those adult classes. They offer a heavy dose of basic literacy and skills. It's still socially acceptable to admit to one's friends that you don't know much about computers. It's less acceptable to say that you lack basic skills and need a refresher course. Adults are much more apt to enroll in something identified as computer class than they are to sign up as something advertised to do with literacy. In addition to the night classes, adults can go to adult education centers located in area high schools and use the latest computer technology. Courses are available in such basic subjects as keyboarding and computer fundamentals, and also in the more sophisticated Windows, Lotus, and word processing programs. And perhaps best of all, these computers and their software are showing up in factories and offices for on-site instruction. Our public school system has become customer-focused. Adult learners in the workplace are able to attend before and after their normal working hours, whether they work the day, afternoon, or the night shift. Also, this past summer, because of our involvement in the New Kid Moves Ahead and Beyond, VOTE made 70 additional laptop computers available to Jefferson County Public Schools Adult Education Unit. In 1992, in its introductory summer, training classes were held at 35 different businesses where over 500 employees participated. If my company is any indication, these on-site classes will be very popular. We had 2.5 applicants for every opening when we had our first computer fundamentals class at the plant this summer. At VOTE, it was no surprise that 80% of those enrolled were older employees, and I'm delighted and encouraged by their interest and initiative. They'll be with us for another 20 years. I want them to be able to qualify for better positions within the company. It is our responsibility to make sure we provide them the training and development necessary and essential to maintaining our marketplace in a very very, very competitive global marketplace. Our training department has been deluged with requests for specific software training using the laptops as the learning tool. I am convinced we could offer computer training 5 days a week, almost 24 hours a day to the end of this century. As you can see, intergenerational computer literacy is the current focus of our efforts. We've also become partners with the public schools in 2 technical centers that provide some of the most advanced high school CAD/CAM training in the nation. These facilities are also heavily used by adults. For example, already more than 100 of our employees have taken computer-assisted drafting courses at facilities we underwrote. I'm proud to announce that I was one of those employees and I passed the course. Of course, they had to pass me. 3 months ago, Superintendent Ingerson dedicated an Advanced Manufacturing Technologies Career Academy. This 55,000 square foot, $4 million center is probably the best in the country. One of the very special features is Option 2000. It's a state-of-the-art technology lab. The lab uses a team approach to teach on 15 different technical modules, including computer graphics, computer-assisted manufacturing, programmable controllers, robotics, applied physics, and laser and fiber optic technology. In this academy, Vogt sponsored the computer-aided engineering drafting systems and the computer-controlled machining station. Well, we're active in other ways as well. We helped the University of Louisville build and equip the Henry Vogt Computer-Aided Engineering and Robotics Building, and we endowed a distinguished professorship at the University of Louisville School of Engineering, which is a major source of new talent for us. Then we worked with the Urban League to set up a 15-unit computer training unit that gives new hope each year to 200 chronically unemployed or underemployed persons. One of our executives now serves on the Urban League Board of Directors, and we like to stay close to the organizations we support. All of our participation in these education-based programs tie hand in glove to our Deming management philosophy and directly affects our 1,700 employees. If employees are our most important asset, how can we not spend at least as much on their professional development and training as we do on the maintenance of our sophisticated machinery? I'm afraid that many corporations view charitable giving only as a financial cost of doing business. This is dangerously short-sighted. Employees are inextricably woven into the fabric of the community in which they and the company exist, and I think we've heard that from every one of the participants that presented at the seminar this afternoon. It only follows that helping the community through responsible philanthropy helps employees, which in turn helps the company, its employees, and the stockholders and the customers. Each of us in business is bombarded by worthy charities needing our funding and our endorsements. Make no doubt that it is stockholders' money we are giving away. Every business is heavily scrutinized by its owners to provide an attractive return on investment. Therefore, the most reasonable answer to corporate philanthropy, at least in my opinion, is a three-way win-win with the company, its employees, and its communities. Stockholders should demand that their company's operating philosophy and donation policies guidelines are in sync. Much of what I've shared with you tonight is a matter-of-fact description of programs, but behind those facts is a dream. I dream that our actions will prompt many other companies to become focused on the win-win opportunities I just mentioned. I began by talking about Louisville and Boston's mutual relationship to American landscape genius Frederick Law Olmsted. He was fond of giving advice to civic leaders. He said, "Adopt an ideal and hold to it." We at Henry Vogt have adopted an ideal. We will hold to it, and we will continue the work that has earned us the Dively Award, and we will continue to urge like-minded companies to join us. Thank you on behalf of all of those who will benefit, our students, our employees, and any company that is willing to invest in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I note that my remarks were timed almost exactly to compete with the total eclipse of the moon. When I mentioned this to one of the kids last night, He noted that the benefit that he would have by watching the total eclipse is that he would not have to listen to my speech. However, he did read it. In any event, Dean Carnesale, Mr. Heiser, honored guests, I'm delighted to be here and to have been asked to speak on behalf of the Massachusetts Board of Education. The Henry Vogt Machine Company has recognized education as a key element in a strong and healthy community, and its contributions to student and adult learning and skill development in Louisville is one of the outstanding national examples of American business involvement in education. Often referred to as school business partnerships, these cooperative relationships range from simple contributions of money to individual schools or programs, to intense collaboration in developing total quality management strategies and participation in classroom teaching. We in Massachusetts are pleased at the role our state has played in the development of the school-business relationship. The United States Department of Education reported that in 1985, Massachusetts had the second largest number of such industry education partnerships after California. Since then, the number in Massachusetts has doubled to 6,000. Our Department of Education seeks to emphasize the human element in such partnerships, promoting structures that build on interpersonal relationships of trust and respect. Business involvement in education has evolved from a civic duty and acceptance that education is a community responsibility to a recognition that it is critical to the economic success and social cohesion of the community. Partnerships are increasingly moving from support to participation, bringing business expertise and strategic planning and concepts of decentralized management, participatory decision-making, cooperative teaming, and performance-based accountability into the mainstream of American education. In the last several years, there has been a still further development, reflecting a fundamental change in the degree of involvement by business in public education, and that is the business community's assumption of a strong leadership role in promoting education reform. I became a member of the Massachusetts Board of Education in August 1991, 1 month after the Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education published the landmark report, Every Child a Winner, a blueprint for systemic reform of the financing, organization, and delivery of education in this state. Many political leaders responded favorably, and we now have 4 comprehensive legislative proposals for education reform in Massachusetts, all building on the concepts and ideas of the business community. It should be noted that in Massachusetts, the leadership for statewide change has emanated from the business community and not from the Department of Education, school committees, superintendents, or teachers' unions. To paraphrase, education is too important to be left to the educators. I'd at least observe that it is clearly too important to be left to educators alone. They must welcome others, and we must join them. The Massachusetts Board of Education has recently adopted what we call Cornerstones of Education Reform, 22 principles geared toward outcomes and which we believe are essential to the success of education reform. We have evaluated the 4 reform packages which are before the legislature and have given our advice, choosing the best of all the provisions in the hope that comprehensive education reform can be achieved. The proposed reforms very much reflect the transforming changes that have affected American business. Equal opportunity for every student, stable, equitable, and predictable funding, the establishment of outcomes and standards based on high expectations for all schools and students, greatly expanded continuous professional development for educators, recognition of high achievement by educators, and streamlined processes for termination of those who are not effective. A major shift in responsibility to school-based management with participation of teachers, parents, students, and community and business representatives with more authority in the principal who is the educational leader of the school, and an assessment and accountability system that applies not only to students, but also to educators and school systems. The application of modern business culture and concepts to education has been discussed by Mr. Heiser. The Vogt Company experience is an example of the burden on our business community to educate and train workers who face radically increased use of technology in all phases of industry and commerce, perhaps $60 billion a year in training costs. The business community has also assumed major responsibility for the education and training of new employees, whether graduates of or dropouts from high school. I believe those students were adequately trained for the workforce needs of the 1950s. American education has been slow to recognize the demands of global competition and the requirement of technical literacy for virtually everyone in the workforce of the 1990s and beyond. Henry Heiser said that in Louisville we propose to provide both the present and future workforce with the technological tools to compete now and in the 21st century. But his vision is far deeper than that when he articulates the benefit of involving the family in education and using technology training as a driving force to achieve intergenerational literacy. Louisville's willingness to educate the entire family is an intellectual challenge to the meaning of public education in many American communities. Louisville is an example of how the business community has enlarged its focus from education at the workplace to a leadership role in the effort to reshape public education in our country. This is a change from the 1950s and 60s, when I believe the American business community, while generous in its support of civic endeavors, was not usually in the forefront in addressing major issues of American society. Intellectual leadership for change often came from labor unions and grassroots efforts, such as the civil rights movement. As American business has faced the challenge and opportunity of global competition and global markets, we increasingly note that it is American business leaders, such as Henry Heiser, who are providing the intellectual leadership to solve important social problems, education being one of them. The George S. Dively Award appropriately recognizes this trend and those companies that do it best. Vogt Machine Company is about as good an example as exists.
Well, I think that Henry Heiser is to be commended for making an exceedingly modest statement about his company's contribution to business and education partnerships. However, the George Dively Award Committee, I'm sure, did not share that view. And indeed, the very importance of the contribution that the Vogt Company has made to business education partnerships led the Dively Committee specifically to schedule tonight's forum event to coincide with the eclipse, operating under that very solid theory of public policy that says that activities and events which take place during an eclipse of the moon have special portent for the future. So I think that explains a bit the timing of tonight's activities. Now, I'd like to start by making a few comments about the world of business education partnerships in general before I turn to what I think is special about the work of the Henry Vogt Company in Louisville. Now, when you look across the spectrum of partnerships, and particularly those that are in large cities, you find that the typical company engaged in a partnership activity is not small or mid-size, despite the fact that such companies account for almost 3/4 of the jobs in the United States. That most of our educational partnerships involve large, highly visible corporations. And rather rarely are these smaller companies invited to sit at the partnership table, and they are very often neglected, particularly in big cities, as a source of jobs. Secondly, small and mid-sized companies are often thought to have a relatively limited capacity for developing their own human resources, and a correspondingly larger business stake in public programs for upgrading the skills and basic education of the local workforce. Yet many of our partnership programs tend to be tailored to the needs and human resources strategies of large companies, even though these are often the companies who have the capacity to recruit the very best workers out of their communities and to provide substantial amounts of employee training on their own. And finally, I think there has been a trend in educational partnerships, business education partnerships, to suffer from something which I call partner sclerosis. a loss of momentum in the partnership movement, particularly a loss of momentum when large bureaucratic school systems are partnered with large corporations. It's very hard to sustain the initial enthusiasm of many of these partnerships. Now, the Henry Vogt model represents a very different experience in my view, and one which we need to pay much more attention to in the formation of partnerships between business and education in the country at large. I think, first of all, the Vogt experience, as Henry Heiser said, underscores the conclusion that medium-sized companies, that for medium-sized companies like Vogt and smaller companies as well, good schools and good vocational preparation are a matter of business necessity. It is not an issue of corporate philanthropy. It is not an issue necessarily of civic responsibility, but it is an issue of survival and progress in a global economy. But beyond that, I think there are an even richer set of lessons provided by the Vogt Company. One of them is that you do not need to be large in order to make available significant program resources and to make available jobs to partnership efforts. The Vogt Company has clearly done both. Secondly, and perhaps even more important, small and mid-sized companies can be effective innovators and effective catalysts in the education reform process. Vogt is an entrepreneurial company. It has been since 1890. Its entrepreneurial behavior has brought it growth, and it has, in its involvement with the education system, has brought leadership and entrepreneurism to Jefferson County schools. And the result of this activity are some state-of-the-art computer literacy and basic skills programs that do things that many other partnerships in the country are just beginning to think about. The Vogt Company, as Henry Heiser has said, is engaged in developing lifelong learning models to deal with the 8 out of 10 of today's workers who are already out of school and at work, but who will remain as an important part of the workforce to the year 2000. The Vogt Company is developing alternative learning environments, such as training and learning in factories and offices. And the company is building bridges not only between school-based and work-based learning, but with family-based learning involving parents and children across generations. And I think finally, the inspiration, or one of the important inspirations of the Vogt model, if I may call it that, is that it's demonstrated a commitment not only inside its company to the principles of total quality management, but it has brought those same principles to its activity in the human resources development area, where it has stressed the notion year after year of producing continuous improvement. Now, I'd like to say a little bit about what this Vogt model suggests for the future, and a little bit about the future of partnerships themselves. It's important to remember that many of the partnerships, but not all, but particularly those that take place in big cities, have been conceived in moments of crisis, in moments of specific political concern. They flourished, however, in a time of neglect of schools and training by the federal government. Now we are led to believe that we are moving into a rather different era from that which we've experienced in the last decade or more. An era in which government is going to devote more resources to education, more resources to cities and so forth. I think ironically, however, there is a danger that this willingness to place more resources at the disposal of schools, of cities, of apprenticeship programs, of skill training programs, of workplace education efforts, may in fact work against educational partnerships. I think in a more comfortable fiscal environment, there is a danger that schools and governments may retreat to their parochial agendas, that governments may, the federal government may gravitate as it naturally does to government relationships with states and municipalities, rather than towards stronger partnerships with the private sector, and business enthusiasm as a consequence may wane. However, I suggest that there are some things that companies like Henry Vogt Company that are engaged in partnerships and committed to improving local education and the skills of their workforce can take some steps to correct this potential drift. One is, and I think this cannot be underscored enough, they can secure existing partnership efforts by providing a strong local voice for anchoring educational resources to the realities of the job market. Secondly, I think they can strive to draw entrepreneurial business into partnerships at a much higher rate than is normally the case, as a means of inspiring entrepreneurial government and entrepreneurial education activities. Third, I think that there is a need to open the partnership frontier a bit further beyond the mid-sized companies like Vogt to include the very smallest employers in the community. And finally, I think it's important to stress, as Henry Heiser did, that central to quality programs, as in the case of business as well, is the input and the involvement of the workforce. And it's important as we think about business and education partnerships to remember that quality programs depend on more than business necessity, and on more than business goodwill, and on more than business participation. But the partnership concept must also include the meaningful representation of the workforce, particularly as partnerships begin to address important issues for the future, such as how competency is to be measured, how skills are to be kept up to date and transferable, and how trainees should be compensated while they are learning. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here to add my congratulations to both to Henry Heiser and the Vogt Company for their fine efforts. Struck me after sort of listening to what other people have said, almost all of which I agree with, that you might wonder, what is a central banker doing here to talk about issues of job training and education? I think Peter Dorringer wondered about that very much. When sitting next to him, the first thing I did, this being a lunar eclipse, was stick my elbow into his glass and cover him with water. But that's because we all know that the central business of central bankers is to throw cold water over everything. So maybe that's why I'm here.
I thought it was to take a bath myself. But,
It's to prevent baths by covering things with cold water. But the reason actually that I think central bankers and economists in general are quite interested in this is that economic performance for a country is affected by structural impediments and by structural factors and not just by macro policy alone. To sort of paraphrase a debate in my own profession, you might say, well, money matters, it's not the only thing that matters. And in fact, as you start to look at institutions, it's less important than many of these other things. In fact, I'd postulate to have a well-functioning economy that we need, obviously, an efficient labor market and sound job training and education programs as well as good macro policy. And neither can be effective without the other, I would say. But let me come back to that in a couple of minutes. When you look at the programs of the Vogt Company and the programs in Louisville generally, you're struck at why these people are doing what they're doing and how they're doing it. Now, it's a long time since I took labor economics under a disciple of Professor Dunlop, who's in the audience. But looking at developments in labor markets over the last few years, or over the last maybe 3 decades, one is struck by the very substantial changes that have occurred. Other people on the panel have referred to the fact that most, if not all, producers now compete in international markets. A dramatic change from the time when many of us first became interested in economics. That means that their workers obviously compete in international markets as well. Also, it seems to me that combined with this has been an enormous result in technological change, which is reflected, of course, dramatically before us in the voc computer training and technological literacy efforts that they've been into. I think that all of this has contributed to a realization at every level that the relationship between employers and workers is changing. Unlike what may have been the case before the war or immediately after the war, few people can expect now to work for one employer using one set of skills for their entire working lifetime. Now, this brings opportunities, but it also brings kind of a cultural shock and challenges. We need to think, I believe, from the perspective of the economy as a whole, how we bring about, in the smoothest way possible, transition to those new realities for both workers and for their employees. I do think that in the labor force as a whole, there is beginning to be a broad understanding of this new reality. Unfortunately, given recent economic conditions, this reality is transmitted as much in fear as is seen as an opportunity. And I think it's been one of the factors that's contributed to the insecurity that people feel, which in turn, through confidence, is affecting the performance of the economy as a whole. Now, I would say if more companies did what the Vogue company did in terms of upgrading their workers and people feeling competent that they're able to compete in the world of the 90s and as we enter the next millennium, then there would be much less of this concern and we'd have a more efficient economy as a whole. I do think that this is a very important issue because if we don't deal with the labor market properly and retraining and continuous training, I think we have somewhat of a catch-22 potentially in the economy. The experience that I've had working with people here on the Boston Private Industry Council convinces me that you can't have successful training and education programs unless at the end of it there are jobs for people to go to. I mean, it just becomes more and more pushing a stone uphill. On the other hand, you can only have a strong national economy, as recent events indicate, when you remove a lot of structural impediments. So these things are very, very symbiotic, I think. Now, in the United States, and increasingly in the world, we've been through a very, very difficult economic period. Fortunately for us here, there are more convincing signs that we're finally coming out of it. I personally think that if we do things right, in both the micro side, which you might call this, and the macro side, we are on the cusp of a very, very promising end of this decade, the 1990s, which really in many ways I think can be a mirror image of the last few years that we've seen. Where a number of excesses of the past had created impediments to growth, many of these things are on their way to being resolved. One example of that is the enormous increase in debt that we've seen throughout the economy at all levels, the corporate level, the consumer level, and the government level, over the last decade or so. But very importantly, that impediment's being addressed and being worked out. Perhaps even more important, as a result of the progress that we've made on inflation, and we made a great deal, we have room now, I think, for a prolonged period of growth before concerns about price increases should emerge as a result of bottlenecks or other constraints. In the short to intermediate term, I simply don't see any reason for great concerns about the price outlook. In fact, given the slack we have in product and labor markets, not just in the United States, but in the industrialized world, I think that the growth that we're likely to get can be accompanied by even further progress on the inflation front. Thus, I think if we do the right things, we have a very, very promising period ahead of us. But doing those right things is going to involve not just macroeconomic policy. It's obvious, though that's going to be very important, but it's obviously going to involve addressing some of the structural problems that we have now and not allowing structural problems such as occurred in the late 1980s, early 1990s to crop up again. And perhaps one of the most important markets where that can be done is in the labor market, and by convincing people that change is not necessarily bad for them and that opportunities really will exist for the future. And I think the work that Mr. Heiser's firm has done is really a tremendous example for the progress that we can make in this area. So that's why, as someone interested in the performance of the economy as a whole, I'd like to salute their efforts. Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions if people would like. We have two microphones, one here and one there. If people would step up to them. I'll ask the first question, right? That's one of the advantages of having it in your house. There's been a lot of talk about what the role of government should be, particularly as we look to the next administration in the needs of training the labor force. We've heard a lot about retraining. We've heard a lot about national programs. What do people think, what is the division or what are the opportunities for cooperation between federal government and the business sector as we think about the needs of our labor force in the decades ahead? For any of you, whoever or all.
Why don't we let the businessman
We can work down this way, right?
Well, as I said in my comments, we are doing what we're doing to survive. And the reason I was happy to win the Dively Award was not for the publicity, but to get other businesses involved. And the Louisville example that you've heard about today, and in my comments also, just illustrates that we wouldn't have given that money if we didn't have the partnership with the government, which Don Ingerson represents. It's wonderful to have the government money there is federal money available. It hasn't been tapped, and I'd love to see it. The last grant that we made, the New Kid in School and Beyond, was a 5-to-1 ratio. It wasn't just votes money. It's the partnership money that Don found in cooperation with our state government. But it'd be wonderful to have the federal government involved. But I don't think that that is the reason I would like to see businesses get involved just because of the federal government. I think the individual communities are going to have to settle their own problems in their own ways. And that's why I'm so grateful also that Dr. Kyle has been an ongoing consultant with us to help guide us, because we've been very, very lucky to have this many-way partnership, not just with Don Ingerson, but so many people have been helping us in our mission. Okay.
Any others? Any comment? Yeah.
Well, I guess what I'd say is that the lessons that have come out of the employment and training experiences of the last several decades are really that there cannot be a federal government blueprint that can be laid on to local communities and to cities. The kind of the character of the program has to be shaped locally. It has to reflect, as many of us have said, the character of local jobs, the character of the local labor force. So that's, I think, one clear message that comes through. Secondly, when I hear about the richness of the computer resources that are available in Louisville, and I look at what is supposed to be a good suburban school system where my son goes to school and where he shares a computer with 2 other classrooms, I'm reminded that there is a tremendous infrastructure deficit in the classroom that can only be made up with investment funds to bring, good and bad schools throughout the country up to the level of computer availability and availability of textbooks and libraries and a whole host of other things to match the standard that's being set in Louisville. And I think thirdly that there's an important federal government role in making sure that the part of the workforce that tends to come last in all of these programs of upgrading and enrichment and so forth continues to get the additional share of funds that are needed to level the playing field in these local labor markets as the economy changes and evolves.
Well, I would add very briefly that I have a lot of sympathy for what Peter Dorringer said. I mean, in the sense that I think labor markets and the challenges that people face vary so much place to place that programmatically a lot of things have to be done on a case-by-case basis. Resources are a different matter, and sort of developing broad blueprints that can be adapted to something else that can be done at the federal level.
Yes, sir.
My question is for Mr. Heiser, the other panelists. It relates to the counsel that you might offer to those businesses in other cities that have attempted to address the issue through both financial support and deployment of human resources in a collaborative relationship with those both in the educational and governmental sectors, who sense either fatigue or frustration with issues that emerge from different cultural dynamics centered around either issues of such issues as standard testing or issues of accountability. And my sense is that in some cities, the business communities are getting concerned, frustrated, unclear as to the long-term productivity of the resources that they are deploying into the educational programs. Clearly that's not occurred in your city, and therefore I'm wondering if you could share with us the kind of counsel that we might offer to those other business communities in terms of the time horizons that they need to consider, the patience factor, and other dynamics that will help them sustain their investments and their enthusiasm over the time necessary to generate a clear-cut, productive improvement.
I would say that what is happening in Louisville certainly has evolved over many years. In my comments, we're in our 10th year, and I think the best is yet to come. You're honoring us today because of something that has happened over many, many years, and I would like to see the Louisville model examined in another 5 years, because I think we're going to be doing leaps and bounds. So my message is don't be impatient, because it's not going to happen overnight. Our people at our company now have only been involved with the technology that we have funded in very few years, the adult side of it. So it's been fabulously exciting. And also in my remarks, we just dedicated a state-of-the-art manufacturing academy this summer, just 3 months ago. And we just don't even know what kind of impact that's going to make. So I guess my message is be patient.
Let me just add that I think the frustration of which you speak is common. The cultures of business and education are different, and it really takes working from both ends to try to bridge that gap. In this state, as we try to achieve reform legislation, get it passed, there's always the threat in the background of many business leaders giving up on the public education system and leading a movement toward a voucher system. In fact, a fifth bill has been filed, led by a former president of a major bank in this city, seeking to establish a voucher system that will really gut public education as far as we're concerned. I don't think that is the way to go. And I think the business community has to recognize that perhaps the problems of education have reached the point where even those who are entrenched in the system are willing to adjust to change and stick with it because we need the input.
Yes. For the panel or for the dean, what is the proper role of higher education, of the university in this collaboration? We've talked about government and business and the public schools. What is the role for the university? We see a very active role on the part of Boston University here in the Chelsea schools. I just wondered if there was any involvement of universities in the Louisville coalitions, or what your reaction would be to that.
Is there, no.
Would
Is
you
there a role
repeat
in
the
what
part where it said the university?
Yes, any university, a higher education, in improving, in the collaboration to improve public education.
Yes, very much so. One of our earlier grants was to endow a professorship. That we wanted a product. We had to have it. And at our university, University of Louisville, where we just dedicated 2 years ago a robotics center, computer-aided engineering robotics center, we couldn't have better cooperation than with the University of Louisville president to produce a product so we don't have to go out of this country to hire the technical engineers we require. Very good partnershiping.
I think we're seeing a fair amount of partnership at the university level. I was at a Newton Education Summit yesterday, and the superintendent was commenting that without the input from Boston College in professional development for teachers and providing leadership and training and the use of technology in the schools, the system would just not have the money to accomplish it. Certainly there's a wonderful example in the success that Boston University has had in its management of the Chelsea system. When I mentioned earlier accountability for systems, under the legislation that's being proposed in Massachusetts, there would be the ability of the Board of Education to take over a school system or a school that was, the word is educationally deficient. That's a code word for educationally bankrupt. And I can see the situation where we would take over a system or schools. It has been done in Kentucky. It's been done in New Jersey. I do not think we would ever run such a system, but would contract it out to someone to run, another town, another city, or a university.
Sure.
I think it's also important to point out that you're not simply talking about universities on the one hand and K through 12 on the other. And that what is happening, particularly in the training area, is that the community colleges, that the two-year colleges are very rapidly assuming the mantle of vocational training, providing yet a further bridge between secondary education and the workplace. And I think that a lot of the action in post-secondary education over the next few years is going to be seeing the different ways that business can begin to relate to the community colleges. And again, here is there's an ideal opportunity for the smaller and mid-sized companies to begin to build those kinds of bridges as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we'll make this the last question here.
I'd like to ask Mr. Heiser specifically how he's dealt with Mr. Dorringer's suggestion that regarding the need to have workforce representation in issues such as measuring competency and pay scales, et cetera, and have the pay scales in your company increased in relation to the higher skills?
Our pay scales are always increasing. It's a very competitive marketplace for the skills that we hire. We are requiring, let me say that we have a situation with two labor unions, and traditionally in a labor union business, there is a conflict between tenure, seniority, and skills. For us to be able to allow an employee to bid on a $3 million computer numerical control machine tool, as an example, we're not about to let an employee who is the most senior person have that job. He has to be qualified. So we have worked with our union management to develop an apprentice program. And at the same time, we have said we will give all of our senior people, or anybody who has the initiative, we will give them all the classes and skills required if they want it. And that's where the partnership began with our school system. So in order for them to have this opportunity, they have to take the initiative, and we will furnish it to them. We'll go more than halfway with them. And therefore, then they bid up on higher paid jobs. And it's happening. It's very exciting. And it's not a seniority issue. It is a skills. So we're giving them that opportunity.
Just on that same theme, in response to something you brought up, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the union response to training as an area of mutual interest? And do you yourself see that as an area of collaboration for the future, that or pilot projects in establishing those types of relationships with that as a focus being worked on?
Well, when I say the word union, or when you mention the word union, I have to separate the management of the union from the actual membership. The membership is overwhelmed. They're surprised. This is a culture that has changed in the last few years in our company. The management of our union are rather old school, and they're coming along, but I think it's because the membership is sweeping them along to say, we want these changes, we want these opportunities, and it's mutually good now, I'd say. It's working.
Well, thank you. Let me say, there's, before I thank our speakers and close this, there is one person in the group tonight, it's been mentioned already, who's Professor Emeritus at Harvard University, professor of everything, university professor, a former dean of arts and sciences, but in this context, perhaps most important for being the inventor of the notion of a Center for Business and Government at the School of Government. This went beyond simply the notion of building a bridge across the creek between the world of business and the world of government, but rather the greater challenge of building a bridge across the wide river between the School of Business and the School of Government and Harvard University, and that's Professor John Dunlop. Thanking our speakers and also realizing that another important side benefit of this discussion this evening, on the evening of a lunar eclipse, is more than ever before, it has clarified the interconnections between two of the most successful disciplines at Harvard University, economics and astrology. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Right. Squeeze that.
It was well worked.
Nice to work with you.
Right, very nice meeting you.
Where it is.
Hello, Regina.